Hello, stroke warriors and families everywhere. This is Ralph Cortese with Stroke Warrior Radio again. Welcome to another episode with Kelli Harris Davis. I'm sorry, I messed that up. Kelli Davis, who's an occupational therapist. And are you on your own, independent, or with somebody?
I am an occupational therapist for a home care agency, but I don't currently work in the field anymore. I'm a divisional rehab manager for my region in Massachusetts.
Awesome. That sounds pretty cool. Um, you're a tireless stroke. Well, welcome. First of all, welcome. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Um,
Thank you.
First of all, let's um, talk about what got you here. I mean, there's, you had some issues in your with other people in your life, I believe.
Yes. So my fiancé that I've been with for about 10 years had a stroke almost 2 years ago. So
Okay.
I've had to dual role of being his partner and a caregiver and an OT. And so it's brought some kind of a little bit of a unique situation to his rehab journey and be able to advocate for him and find where there have been issues that we've needed to step in and advocate. Um, so it's been
Tell
quite the
us about
journey,
two
and
years
I'm
ago.
yep,
Tell us about
about
two
2 years
years ago.
ago.
What changed? Yeah. What
So
happened?
he's 46. He was 46 years old at the time. Has had a sudden stroke. Started with word finding difficulties, and I knew right away with my experience. I've worked with stroke patients for many years. I've been an OT for almost 30 years. It'll be 30 years next year. So I've worked with a lot of neuro patients in the past and was on the neuro team when I worked at an inpatient rehab facility. So I'm very familiar with stroke and very familiar with the symptoms. And so as soon as he was having those word finding difficulties and the right side of his face was drooping, I knew what was happening. So, but him being him, little bit stubborn, didn't believe me that there was something going on with him. So it took a bit for me to convince him to be seen. But then, yes, once he was seen, they transferred him to the hospital in Rhode Island, and he was in the neuro ICU there for about a week. Left-sided ischemic stroke with right-sided weakness and aphasia. So the aphasia was
Okay.
pretty severe, and yeah, he was there for about 2 weeks and then went to inpatient rehab at Spalding in Boston for a couple of weeks after that.
Oh, that's not bad. A couple of weeks isn't too shabby. I,
Yeah.
I was so angry when I was in the hospital and I refused to go to inpatient. Well, I was
Mm.
living alone at the time, so it was like, I can't do that.
Oh, certainly it took some convincing. He thought he'd be able to walk out of the hospital, and he didn't have any use at the time of his right leg, right arm, and couldn't communicate. So it did take some convincing that, yes, you don't have a choice. You're going to have to go to rehab. And I think he was only there 2 weeks because of my background, because they knew I'd be able to help him at home. So they kind of got him in and out quickly. I think a different situation, he probably would have been kept a little bit longer, but it was fine. He was ready to go, and we had what we needed at home. So he was able to come home.
So tell us how, I mean, the whole situation. You're an occupational therapist. You've been in stroke recovery so long. Um, how did that shape your understanding of caregiving?
Well, it was a balancing act, certainly, because if you know anything about occupational therapy, we make sure the patient does as much for themselves as they can and try to be independent as possible. That's always the OT's goal is to achieve independence. But a caregiver tends to want to step in and help. So it was a balancing act for me to show some compassion and not be too tough on him, but at the same time try to get him to be independent as possible. So not to help too much. So, but yeah, I definitely had to decide when to push and when to not push. So it was a little bit hard in that aspect. So when he was tired or fatigued or didn't feel like doing something, then step in and help. But on days where the mood was right, encouraged to do as much as he could for himself to try to get the right arm strength back. And there was a delay. So I think in the hospital was where I really had to step in, and that was frustrating because there was about 8 days between when he was ready to be discharged to rehab and before he actually went. And that was, he pretty much stayed in bed the whole time. So that was very frustrating for me, sitting there from an OT standpoint, saying, oh, all this time is being wasted for his rehab. He could be doing this, and no therapist came to see him at the hospital other than just do initial evaluations. He wasn't getting any speech therapy, and he had complete aphasia. They didn't give him any communication boards or any way to communicate. So all of that was frustrating on my end, knowing what should be happening and wasn't. And that was probably the most stressful. That 8 days of him just sitting in the bed and waiting for a rehab bed was probably the most stressful time. It was even more stressful than the stroke itself.
I'll
So,
bet the
and
nurses and
I'm
doctors
trying to
love seeing you,
provide.
right?
No, they did not. I was calling daily, calling the patient advocate daily. What is the delay? What is going on? Why isn't he getting therapy while he's there? And why isn't, where's the rehab bed? It was just, it was, yeah, very frustrating. So, and I would call the doctor daily, and the doctor said, well, we put in the orders for the therapy, but I think that they were just very short-staffed, and um, they knew that he was going to rehab, so they didn't make it a priority to see him. But yeah, he was stuck in that bed for a long time. And yeah, I would provide communication boards for him so he could communicate, and they would get lost or thrown away. So that's a lot of where my advocacy has come from, is that
Yeah,
inpatient acute care needs to improve. It's a lot different from when I worked in acute care. And so it was like, where are the therapists? What is going
yeah.
on with
Well,
the
and that was part of
delay?
my issues in the beginning too, is there was so little information given to us. There was so little um uh they didn't tell us this was the most difficult thing we'd ever do in our life. Um and from a I can't imagine, like you said, balancing act you had to go through, knowing that recovery can happen, but also being a partner with that person. I mean, that how frustrating was that? Jeez.
Yeah, because yeah, he didn't want me to be a therapist. He wanted me to be, his fiancé. He wanted me to be able to care for him, and if he needed to. And he also has modesty. So the running joke is,
Yeah.
he didn't. I've never in our 10 years together, helped him in the bathroom or been in the bathroom when he's been in the bed. But things like that, like he's like, we're not there yet. When it comes to having to help him with certain things, like he does have his dignity and his modesty, and I'd have to respect that. But as you know, OTs tend to be the ones who help with those things and get your independence back for toileting and showering and getting dressed and all of those things. So it was hard for him to adjust to me helping him, and then knowing when I needed to step back and let someone else help him. But then also the not having to watch myself on not interfering when someone else was helping him incorrectly too. So
Yeah,
protecting
yeah,
his shoulder,
exactly.
protecting his arm, and all of that when he was being moved around in the bed. And it's hard. I had to bite my tongue several times, but then there are certain times where I had to step in and say, "No, please don't pull on his arm." So
Putting your caregiver hat on. Where do caregivers most often get stuck in the first 90 days?
I think navigating the care system is a big challenge for a lot of people who don't know what is out there, what resources are out there. And since I've started speaking up and advocating, and I've started, an Instagram page, I have a blog, and people who have responded to me are ones who have been stuck in that quagmire of not knowing that these resources exist, not knowing that 8 days in the hospital, someone else could go through that same thing and not realize that they should be getting up, they should be getting out of bed, they should be getting some therapy, they should be moving around, they should have that attention, and they maybe just sit at their bedside and not realize that these things, um, should be different, that they should be reaching out to the patient advocate and making sure that they're getting the services that they need, and to know what steps, where they should be going, they would have probably put him in a skilled nursing facility at a nursing home had I not pushed for inpatient rehab. And I know that the difference between the two. So I think that some people just follow along with what they're told and don't necessarily know to speak up or what they should be advocating for. So I think that's challenging. And then, not realizing that delays in care, there are ways around delays in care. You just have to know the right resources and who to speak to and who to get help from. So I think that's a challenge for a lot of people who don't do it on a daily basis.
And I'm sure the list is long, but for example, what are some of the care access or system delays kind of that led you to your advocacy work in the first place?
Well, that definitely that 8 days in the hospital and that level of that frustration of not getting the care that he needs. That was definitely one of the first things that led me to my advocacy. And then when he was finally discharged, once he was in rehab at Spalding, I could breathe. I was comfortable with him being there. He was getting the care he needed. He was getting like almost 5 hours of therapy a day, between the PT, OT speech and the group therapy he was getting. So he was in good hands. I felt comfortable. That anxiety just went away. But when he got home, there was another delay in care because outpatient couldn't get him in for um, the speech therapy, couldn't start him for 4 months.
Oh,
Um, so, and that was his main issue. Besides his arm, I mean, his leg was working pretty well by the time he got home. He was able to walk with assistance, but really the right arm was still completely flaccid, and his speech was still severely impaired. So I was like, we can't wait 4 months for speech, So
right.
I made phone calls. I did everything I could to get him seen sooner. And then, of course, me being in the field, having resources and having connections, I actually have a friend who's a speech therapist who saw him pro bono until we got him started in outpatient. And then
Wonderful.
we got him moved up to outpatient. Instead of 4 months, it was more like 6 weeks. So got him in within 6 weeks. But it was me calling, are there any openings? Are there any openings? Until
Yeah, yeah.
they found an opening. So
Well,
instead of June, he started in March.
wow. Um,
Yeah.
so if, and I'm trying to juggle like you have, the OT
hmm
and the care partner.
hmm
What if a care partner doesn't have the OT background or medical background? What do you suggest to them in the beginning?
I think just don't be afraid to speak up. Look for resources. You can Google, you can Chat GPT is a wonderful resource now for so many people. Like, you could enter your problem into there. My partner came home, has no access to therapy until this. What would you suggest? Sometimes they can, Chat GPT can give you suggestions on where's a different inpatient or outpatient rehab facility, or who could you reach out to get these resources. Go to your doctor and tell them the frustrations. This is a delay. What can we do to get it moved up faster? And, talk to people, post about it on social media. A lot of times you can find somebody who can help or give you suggestions to get care moved up faster. And don't forget to just continue to call. Don't just take 4 months. We don't have anybody for 4 months as an answer. Sometimes just say, just check in, nicely, just check in if
Yeah,
there's any changes or, and every time I called there was an update. Like, oh, this one, we hired a new speech therapist. She's in training. She's going to be in training for, they just kept giving me updates on when it could be possible. And then all of a sudden there was an opening. So we were able to get him
awesome.
in.
Awesome.
But without calling frequently, we would have probably still waited that 4 months.
You said something interesting before about when he was in patient rehab that you were able to relax. Talk about that a little bit because, most care partners, um, my point is, it's not just the person that has a stroke, it's
hmm
everybody.
hmm
Um, so I mean, talk about that a little bit for our listeners to know. what that's like.
Definitely. So, yeah, my stress level, like I said, was really high while he was waiting for that rehab bed, me trying to get him placed somewhere. Um, so I do somebody who doesn't have that knowledge of how things work would probably have that same level of stress. But once he got to inpatient rehab, I trusted them. I knew that he was in good hands. He was in the right place for him, and I was able to take a step back and get some things done for myself and catch up on some things at home. But again, like I think it's super important to stay on top of it. Stay on top of what's going on there, what his schedule is. I had access to his my chart so I could see the notes every day. I didn't have to be there for therapy. I was there the first day when he did his initial OT eval, PT eval, speech eval. I was there for all of the initial evals. Then once I met the therapists, I saw that he was in good hands. Um, I could manage it kind of from home. It was an hour and a half ride to rehab from where we live. So in order for me to get there on a daily basis was impossible and still continue to work. So I was able to monitor him from the my chart and I'd see the notes because they enter their notes at the end of the day
Yeah.
after they'd see him and I could read his therapy notes every day and know what he was working on. And I was always comfortable with what they were doing, and I didn't have to call, I didn't have to check in until they started talking about discharge in the notes. And then I said, okay, let's get on, and let's start to have a conversation. But they had a really great case manager who kept me updated as well. So that was the difference between the inpatient hospital experience and the inpatient rehab experience. They just do a much better job of keeping you updated.
How did you, um, for our listeners in particular, how did you handle the stress, the self-care, the mental health issues for yourself during that time?
Well, that there's actually one of my Instagram posts has my blood pressure when he was in patient hospital was really high. And I took a picture of it. I was like, I've never seen my blood pressure this high. And so I knew that I needed to step back and do some things, make sure that I was taking care of myself. And so when he was in inpatient rehab and I didn't feel like I had to be there every day, I would sit and catch up with some work related things. I would, spend some time with the dogs. When I did go up to visit him in Boston, he was in an area that I wasn't familiar with. So I explored the city a little bit. Like on a Saturday, I'd go spend the whole Saturday with him, and he had to go to therapy still on Saturdays too. So while he was in therapy, I stuck around for a little bit, but then sometimes if you're in the profession, the therapists don't necessarily like other therapists hovering too much.
Yeah, right.
You feel uncomfortable. I've been in that position where I'm like, gosh, they're judging me. So, especially the young ones, Saturday, they always have the young therapists there, and I always felt like they felt uncomfortable with me hovering. So I would go get a coffee in the cafeteria, and I went and like took nice walk around the area in Boston where he was, and took some pictures. I'd FaceTime my daughter. Um, I did a lot of things just to kind of relax and take some time for myself.
Yeah. But I'm interested that you've gone from, um, I'm going to say, an author, blogger. You've gone from a wife or uh, care partner, occupational therapist, to an author and blogger. Tell us about that.
Well, I've always been an author in the background. I actually went to college to be a writer. That was my original focus before OT school. And yeah,
Oh,
I
wow.
had always wanted to be a writer. I've written several books, 9 books that I've self-published in my past life. But while I was in college, I kind of had a change of heart. I started to think more about going into healthcare instead because of some health issues that my dad was going through at the time. And I had witnessed him getting some OT, and I had worked as a candy striper in high school. And the favorite place for the candy stripers to work was in the OT clinic. with the kids. So I always wanted to work with kids. That was always my goal. But so I kind of took it, I deviated a little bit because I was like, do I really want to be a writer? Because sometimes I wasn't excited about some of the writing stuff I was doing in college, and it was kind of steering me down a different path. So I said, well, let's try a completely different uh, path and do OT. Applied for OT school and got in there. But I've always, always, always still been a writer at heart. So still in my younger days when I was working, I had time. I don't know how I fit it in, but I had time and I still wrote novels. I went to some writing conferences and did the self-publishing, 9 different novels. But then when I started home care about 15 years ago, I think life just got even busier and I kind of put writing on the back burner. I'd still blog. I have a couple different blogs. I had an OT blog that I did for a while during the pandemic to help the OT motivation for OTs because the pandemic was tough on a lot of healthcare
Oh, nice.
professionals. So I have a blog for uh, OT motivation and I still have that. But I don't update it that often, but I've always had my personal blog that I've done my whole life or since blogs became available. It's been probably 20 years I've been doing my blog, but I just don't update it as often as I used to. And then when Sean was in the hospital, my creative outlet was updating his Caring Bridge page, which kind of became like a blog too. So I was that it's journaling, writing has always been very therapeutic for me. So the Caring Bridge page was a way for me to get the word out to his family, friends, people who were texting me constantly. I sometimes would get overwhelmed with the texts, the phone calls. So I would say, here's my update for today, and just update the Caring Bridge page and have everybody just check that. And so then that kind of became, as I would write more, I'd be like getting more and more passionate about certain things, the frustrations about our journey. Then that's where the advocacy kind of was born. And then I started writing the novel. I'm writing a
Okay.
novel. It's a fictionalized account of his stroke. A little bit of changes here and there. I decided to make it more semi-autobiographical instead of a true biography or a true memoir. So I've been writing that. It's not done yet. And then someone reached out to me to write a chapter for her
Okay.
book, which let me just get you the title of it. The title is um, Finding Yourself After a Loved One's Stroke. So she asked me to write a chapter for that. That's Letitia Living. And she has
Nice.
another book already out, Fighting Yourself After Stroke. And that book is already out, it's published, and that's chapters done by people who have had a stroke
Oh,
and
nice.
their journeys. So then the second book that she's writing is about caregivers and their experiences after someone has had a stroke. So I've written a chapter for that. So that's in process of publication.
The organization I work with here is called Stroke Awareness Oregon. They're putting out a
Hmm.
second book, and it's called Stroke is a Family Affair. So it's
Yes.
essentially doing the same thing you're doing. The first book
Right,
was
right.
Just Say Yes to Life,
Oh,
which
nice.
was 28 stories of survivors like me. I'm in one
Hmm.
of the stories. So yeah, we're doing pretty much the same thing. Um,
Hmm.
Tell me about your advocacy. I mean, what do you do now for advocacy that helps others?
Well, in my position as the divisional rehab manager, I run meetings with other rehab managers in the New England area, and I've created um, a presentation on advocacy, how to be an advocate and a caregiver at the same time, and a healthcare professional and an advocate. So we've done a lot of education within our own company. I'm trying to develop that into being something that I present to other outlets in the future. So I've approached some other entities about doing some presentations for them as well. And the I've also, sorry, can you hear the dogs barking? I've also, I've also gone down the rabbit hole of, because we don't really know what caused his stroke for sure, other than his neurologist has suggested that it could be related to previous head injuries that he had. He was a soccer player, semi-professional soccer player, and he has had multiple concussions. His favorite thing to do was heading the ball. So
Okay.
he did a lot of, and so when she suggested that, she gave us the resources of the BUCTE, this chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the BUCTE brain donation program. She gave us that information about reaching out to them because they're doing a research project on living brain donors to be studied after, post mortem to see if they possibly had CTE. So he has signed up for that. He's done all of the assessments for that. Then they referred him to the Concussion Legacy Foundation for resources. And when the Concussion Legacy Foundation found out I was an OT, they kind of pulled me in to say, hey, would you mind being like a partner to us and helping us with concussion rehab education? So I've been working on a presentation for concussion rehab education as well and prevention of CTE. So I've been back and forth with them about doing presentations for them as well. So that's another area of focus, that another path.
Yeah, definitely. And probably another interview too for us.
Yeah.
Anyway, um, one of the most interesting things I keep hearing the undertone of is building a personal rehab team. And how do you coordinate all of that? Because it took me several years before I found out I was the captain of my team, not my
Hmm.
PCP tell me go to this doctor,
Oh,
that
right.
therapist. I was
Hmm.
allowed to fire my therapist. I was allowed to go out and
Yeah.
interview my therapist and inspect their facilities. Tell me
Yeah.
about developing that personal rehab team, or tell our listeners
Definitely.
how
I
to.
think that is so important to know that you have that say. And I think that I had to be Sean's voice for a while because he couldn't speak for himself. He can now. He certainly can now. He has a strong voice, but I had to know what he wanted and what he needed and what was best for him. Like time of day, for instance, like again, the balancing act. Me coming from a home care background where home care therapists are very focused on getting those early visits scheduled. Nobody likes for therapy to come out at 8 a.m., but you have to have patients to see at 8 a.m. So I know from their perspective why it's important to be able to have those early morning therapies, but then I know from the patient's perspective why sometimes you really can't do that early. And for him, I had to advocate. I had to say, you know what? He can't do an 8:30 appointment. He's not going to be here. He's not going to be able to participate. He's not going to be able to participate well because he just it's his schedule. It's always been his schedule. He is not a morning person, and it's even worse after the stroke. So I think that having
Exactly.
that understanding that you can speak up and be in charge of your team is so important. Say, you know what, this is why, again, with all kindness, this is why it doesn't work for me. If you want my best participation, you know that the afternoon appointments are going to be best for me. Of course, we were eager to get him started, so we started with early morning. But yes, he is in charge of his rehab and his rehab team. But at the beginning, I had to be that voice for him and know what was best for him. And even though I knew that the therapists needed to fill those spots, but
Yeah.
they weren't going to fill them with
Well,
him.
you just said you had to be the captain for him. What
Hmm.
for the non-medical care partner out there, where do you suggest they look for information? How do they become that captain of the team with everything going on?
It's tough, and I think that just a learning process along the way. There's a huge learning curve for people who don't have that knowledge. Finding a partner that does, finding someone in the field that does know how to navigate it is helpful. Again, those case managers, the social workers, all of the people who will work for those facilities are great resources. I actually learned a lot from the case manager at Spalding that I didn't even know. There were things that she told me about, the home modification loan program to get the bathroom because we had to have the bathroom redone for him. I didn't know that there was such a thing, that there was a loan through our state that would pay for the renovations. Here I have been an OT for 30 years and I never knew that loan program existed. I'm like, gosh, where were you? I needed this information to give to my patients. So those case managers are a wealth of information. If you can get their time and get their ear, they want to help. That's why they're in the role that they're in. There's also critical care nurses, which I didn't know about either. His PCP has a critical care nurse on the team that would check in with us weekly and say, is everything going okay? Or how are you getting all the appointments that you need? Are you getting the specialist set up that you need? And I would say, hey, you know what, this specialist that he needs to go to, we can't get there for 6 months. And she's like, let me make some calls. So those people do exist. Sometimes you have to ask and say, but most, like he goes to a community health center, most community health centers or um, uh, doctors under a larger umbrella have those people on their staff, the critical
Nice.
care nurses or case managers or somebody that can help navigate those waters if you don't know where to go. And I learned a lot from just them. So,
Yeah, I'll bet. I'll bet.
mhm,
It's funny you're talking about case managers. One of the best things that ever happened to me after a couple of years was a social worker. A social worker came in and helped me
mhm,
get an apartment, helped me get income, helped me get Medicare and
yep,
Medicaid, then I
right,
found out there's case managers with the insurance company. You can be
mhm,
assigned a case manager and call them anytime and work with them as
right.
well. You know,
Yes,
it's
yes, that is true. I did get, through the insurance, they would reach out and say, "Do you need us?" But we already had a lot of other resources, so we didn't ever utilize it through the insurance. But certainly, there
it's
are
a good
people
place
out
to,
there that do that for a living to help you
yeah,
navigate. Yeah.
yeah. It's something so simple, but and it sounds silly, but nationwide in the United States anyway, we have the 211
Hmm.
number, which is an
Hmm.
information number. I found all kinds of stuff on that. I found a mental health counselor. I found a dentist that would work with my insurance. There's all kinds of stuff there.
Yeah, and there's local resources too that can help. Like his community health center was helping him fill out some disability applications and some other
Right.
paperwork, and then they referred him to a local resource that would help navigate that. And so having that resource too, I found that, we had already done most of the stuff that they had suggested to us. But there are people out there who will help you with your applications, help you fill out disability or Medicaid applications, anything like that that you need to have some assistance with. There's people that are dedicated to just that role in the community.
Yeah. People probably hate that I say this so much, but I consider the only dumb question is one you don't ask.
Hmm.
If you
Hmm.
have a question that comes to your head about care or whatever, there's somebody out there that
Hmm.
can answer it, so don't
Hmm.
ask those questions or do ask those
Right.
questions.
Hmm.
How do you balance it? Just personal, and if it's too personal, tell me, but how have you balanced your dual identities of therapist and care partner?
Um, in the beginning, it was definitely challenging. Like I said, standing and watching him struggle with something, knowing that he needed to really try to do it himself, but then knowing when to step in when he was getting frustrated, I think was challenging in the beginning. Now he's more independent, so it's not as much of an issue. I still manage all of his finances and I manage all of his appointments. He'll still come to me when a doctor's office calls and they start to go on and on too much about something that he knows he's not going to remember, or it's too much for him to try to communicate with me. He's like, hang on, hang on, hang on, and he hands me the phone. So, um, but I think that balance is important to know when to be the caregiver and when to be the person that's kind of doing the pushing to make somebody more independent. And I know too what the key thing for him was always was to get back to driving. And you say driving to rehab professional after a stroke, they cringe a little bit because they're like, don't know,
Yeah.
because there's so much that happens in the brain, with impulse control
Yeah.
and
Attention spans. Yeah.
attention span and awareness of your surroundings and your vision and so many things that go into being able to drive successfully, and the stroke can impair so many different things. But I knew that was his goal. He has a Mustang. It's a manual transmission and it's his
Oh,
right
wow.
arm that was impaired. So in the beginning it seemed like quite a steep hill to climb to get there, but I knew that was end his end goal. And what mattered the most to him was getting into his Mustang again. Initially, I didn't think, I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to sell this car. I can't drive it. I can't drive a manual transmission. What are we gonna like? I'm playing it all out in my head. How are we gonna? He's never gonna let go of this car. He loves this car. How are we gonna do this? Why would we pay for a car he can never drive again? But he's driving his car again. And it was about 4 months after his stroke, he was back behind the wheel again. So pushing that and telling the OT that he was working with at Spalding that this is his goal, and I could read her mind the first day she
Yeah.
saw him, like, oh gosh, okay. So, but she worked on it with them, and she did a lot of driving rehab with him. She did a lot of vision testing with him, and she cleared him. She cleared him to drive and said that, yep, you're good to go. Um, so it was amazing that happened as quickly as it did. But that was me knowing what mattered the most to him and making sure that got communicated, even though it was a scary idea. But yeah, knowing
Well,
don't be afraid
and
to reach for the big
that's one
goals.
thing that you need to look for with your therapist is if they don't ask you what your goals are,
Hmm.
I'm sorry you froze up. That's one thing you need to search for with your therapist or recognize. If they don't ask you what your goals are, you need a new therapist.
Right. Yes, definitely. And they have to, sometimes, like I said, they cringe a little bit because they're like, gosh, is this realistic? We don't know. But once they worked with them more and more, then they realized, yeah, okay, we can get there. We can get there.
Yeah,
But sometimes it's not realistic. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and you'll have a patient come to you that says, I want to walk again, that hasn't walked in 10 years. Um, and sometimes you have to be the bearer of bad news that it's not going to happen. But you never know. There's all kinds of new technologies and there's new ways of doing things. So sometimes you have to think outside the box and not be the naysayer off the bat, especially at your evaluation. You have to take some time, get
yeah,
to know the patient, see what's really possible.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Anything you want to add for today's show anyway?
I'm
Anything you
sorry,
want
you
to add
froze that
today?
time.
Anything you want to add
I
today?
don't think so. I
Okay,
think we've covered a lot. I don't think so. I think we're good. But
okay. Well, we'll talk again soon.
okay.
Kelly, your work matters. Survivors don't need another pamphlet or care partners. They need someone who's walked into the darkness, faced the fear, and who came out on the other side with clarity and tools. To everyone listening, your recovery doesn't end when rehab ends. You are still here because there is more to life, more love to give, more purpose ahead of you. I invite you to stay with us for new shows with Kelly as we explore care partnering, occupational therapy, and whatever. Thank you, Kelly, for your time today.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Until next, yeah, I enjoyed it too. Till next time, catch the wave. Warriors achieving victories every day.